Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. The topic of our discussion today is to turn our attention to different models that economists have created, different market structures that they've created in order to understand more about how the firm responds to the market structure within which they're operating, the industry structure of the markets. And so there are four models that we'll talk about, and think of them as 4 points along a continuum of matters of degree of competition. Because that's basically, as I've said to you all along, the world exists in a spectrum, all right, continual spectrum of different degrees of things. And so, as I said, economists have chosen 4 points along that and laid out the assumptions of that particular market structure. And then from that, we can develop some greater knowledge of how the firm would operate within that particular system. So we noted that a market is all the firms and individuals who are willing to interact with each other, buy and sell a particular product. Oh, God. Oh. It's just... And some markets are close and some markets are international. And the market structure, as I said, it talks about what are the attributes of the market that would affect the operation of the firm in doing that. So I've laid out 4 graphs showing differing degrees of elasticity, which is the result of looking at differing numbers of competitors or different closeness of competitors. And clearly, as we've talked about slope, D1 is the least competitive situation. So demand tends to be more inelastic. There's not a lot of substitutes. D2, there are some substitutes, maybe not a lot. D3, there are lots of substitutes. And then D4, there's an infinite number of identical substitutes. So that is the perfect competition model. As you move to the right, you're analyzing more and more degrees of competition facing the firm. As you move to the left, you're looking at what is called more and more degrees of market power, greater market power. And the term market power means the ability to charge a price above marginal cost. The term market power, and I use market power as opposed to monopoly power because market power applies to any firm that has a downward sloping demand curve. But it's the ability to charge a price above marginal cost in the industry. The 4 names of the models are monopoly is the least competitive case. Oligopoly and monopoly, I've said to you, is like a benchmark, and it assumes that you're the only firm in the entire industry. Mono means one, so you're the only firm in the industry. We then move to industry structures where there's a few firms, maybe 2 to 7 or 8, that have like the majority of sales, that have like 80, 90% of the sales in the industry. That's called an oligopoly industry. We then look at what's called monopolistic competition, and I've got more explanatory slides later on each one of these. But monopolistic competition means there are lots of similar products, but they are differentiated. They're differentiated. They're not identical. And then finally, perfect competition means the products are identical across all the sellers. The buyer couldn't even identify who the seller was, who the producer was in that case. So as we said, monopoly means one firm in the industry, the only firm. And it's a benchmark, as I just explained, meaning that every firm faces competition of some degree, even if it's competition from you making it at home, right, instead of buying it, whatever the case may be. Oligopoly, these are the slides I should have gone through. A duopoly is a subset of oligopoly. Du means 2, so a duopoly means 2 firms, majority of the industry. The standard example is a Duracell and Energizer in the alkaline battery industry. Together, they make up about 87% of all sales of those, AA and AAA batteries. And they both advertise they are the best in the industry. Well, it turns out that both of those claims are true on different characteristics of the product. Duracell has the longest shelf life. That is, if your flashlight's sitting in the drawer, Duracell will maintain the charge for a longer period of time than Energizer. If you're using something that uses batteries and you're using it for a long period of time, like a sustained usage of it, then Energizer has a longer sustained period of power than Duracell. Everybody see it? So it's just two different characteristics. And here are some standard examples. The electric meters outside your house are sold to regulated utilities, which are the electric companies within each state, and they're regulated by the state utilities commission, PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, and their prices are controlled by the state commission, and they have to go and petition to get more and so forth. And there are 4 major manufacturers of these electric meters that go on the back of houses. Number one, because I'm a regulated utility, the one thing I don't want is a complaint to go to the PUC. Y'all with me? They're very, very sensitive about complaints going to the PUC. I had a friend who's an attorney who used to take advantage of this. She supposedly had MS, which I don't think she actually had. But she would contact the PUC about all these different things, or contact insurance companies, like after the earthquake, and say I wasn't treated fairly. Oh no, she went to her state senator, and the insurance companies are also regulated, right? The home insurance companies. So they sent out like 4 guys, and she got like $95,000 in compensation. Oh, chimney. Yeah, we'll have to replace the entire chimney, right? There's like a little crack in the chimney. No, the entire chimney. So anyway, the regulated utilities or insurance companies are very, very sensitive to complaints. Consequently, and then also, I'm not as concerned about pricing, because I can pass on the price, if I get it approved by the PUC, to my rate base, right? And so they look at what are your costs, and then basically the goal is to get you to earn a normal rate of return, which means 0 economic profits, in setting the rates. But if your costs go up, then you're allowed to raise your rates to cover them. One of the things that has affected homeowners in California in particular is that the utilities are required to buy solar electricity, if you have a double-way meter that goes both ways, at like 18 cents per kilowatt hour. And you can generate electricity at about 9 cents per kilowatt hour for gas. So they have to buy it. Consequently, their costs are higher, and then that gets transferred to higher prices to you as the users of them. But anyway, in these meter markets, the last thing they want is a meter to fail, right? So they're very concerned about quality. A new firm would have great difficulty entering the market because of your uncertainty about the quality of their product. Y'all with me? These 4 firms have been around for a long time: GE and Square D and some others. And so they've established a quality level that's dependable in the industry. And they make a higher rate of return because there are these barriers to entry. That is the fact that the utilities are not going to buy from, and the utilities are not that worried about price sensitivity. So most of the prices are pretty close to them. Automobiles, obviously there are about 7 companies that make the majority of automobiles. Kitchen appliances, go into Bed Bath & Beyond. You have Cuisinart, you have KitchenAid, you have GE, you have Samsung or somebody. But there's a limited number of them that make the toaster ovens and the mixers and those kinds of things. And then same thing in the television industry. It's an oligopoly. You have a few major manufacturers that dominate the sales. Monopolistic competition, there are many firms that are competing with differentiated products. And my favorite example of this is paper towels. People who come from Asia or from Europe are stunned when they go in the grocery store because there's literally a half an aisle of paper towels to choose from. You all with me? It's like a whole half an aisle. You start with the cheapest, which is Ralph's plain white paper towels. They sell for 79 cents a roll. They are on a piece of cardboard, and they are paper towels. And then for 82 cents, you can get that in a pastel color, slightly differentiated. And then you begin to move up, and you get to the absorbent paper towels. Who is that? Absorbent? No, that's for toilet paper. Absorbent paper towels is who? Bounty. What's the catchphrase? Bounty is the quicker picker upper. I've taught this class for 30 years, and for 30 years my students know that phrase. That's how effective it's been in advertising. And you've seen they show the two, and then they show the Bounty is picking up more than the other paper towels, and so forth. And now you're up to about, I don't know, $1.10. And then you keep moving up, and then you get to the strong paper towel. Who is that? The strong paper towel. Brawny. Good. And Brawny's ads show things like, here's a wet paper towel, and I'm able to carry a dozen hard-boiled eggs. And it's like, I don't carry hard-boiled eggs in a wet paper towel, right? There's another one where they have this guy, and this poor woman's in the kitchen, and she picks up a Brawny paper towel, and her arm turns into this monster, and it drags her around the room while she's cleaning everything, and so forth. So that's Brawny. And then you get to the combination of absorbency and strength. And then you get to the super high end, and they have like different designs on the towel, right? Like different artistic designs or philosophical sayings like have a nice day or buy a brownie from a brownie or something like that. So you have all these different paper towels to choose from. The reason I know so much about this is we did a marketing study for a company that makes paper towels. And I studied it and learned all about absorbency and strength of the towels. And one of the most important characteristics of a paper towel is they're on a roll. And when you go and you grab and pull, what do you want to have in your hand? A paper towel, one paper towel. If you buy Ralph's paper towels and you grab and pull, one of two things will happen. Either the whole roll will just unroll, right? Or the whole roll will come out of the dispenser because the cardboard is so cheap and so forth. Or it will tear vertically, so you have one paper towel that's like 3 feet long, stuff like that. And then the other is the perforation of the towel. The perforation allows you to get one paper towel. About 2 years ago, I think it was, Bounty now makes half-size paper towels, and it was really a smart move, because a lot of times you don't need the whole paper towel. So now it's perforated at half size, and so that's a positive. Good. In monopolistic competition, there's no barriers to entry, meaning any new firm can open up and sell paper towels. Y'all with me? There's no patents. There's no extreme economies of scale in production, so new firms would be able to enter, and as a consequence of that, you can make profits in the short run, but not in the long run, because if you're profitable, then they can make similar products, right? So profits possible in the short run, but not the long run, because there is free entry into it. And it turns out that these industries tend to have a high amount of advertising. And the reason is you're constantly trying to point out how your towel is different than other people's paper towels. Or laundry detergent, right? Laundry detergent, another example. New and improved, right? Bigger box, now I add Clorox to it. Now I add Downy fabric softener to it. All these kinds of changes in quality and so forth. So you see a lot of advertising. You also see a lot of stuff going on sale at the retail level. So you'll see coupons for Bounty paper towels or whatever they may be. Examples, as we said, laundry detergents. There's a few, there's many, many brands to choose from. Now, these K-cups of coffee, there's a whole rack of different ones that you can buy. So that's monopolistic competition. Soft drinks, obviously, lots of different ones. Wine and craft beer, which my son has introduced me to. Good. Monopoly, oligopoly, monopolistic competition. Now the most competitive case of perfect competition. There's 4 assumptions that economists have established to make this the most competitive situation a firm could be operating in, the most competitive environment the firm could be in. Number 1, there are lots and lots of both buyers and sellers. In the mathematical model, there's actually an infinite number of sellers. And what that means is that any single seller, whether he produces or doesn't produce, has virtually no effect on market price because his portion or her portion is so small relative to the marketplace that if you produce all 50,000 bushels or none, but the market is like millions of bushels, you have no effect on market price. Everybody with me? So the assumption is lots and lots of sellers, therefore any single seller has almost no effect on market price. The same thing with buyers. There are lots and lots of buyers, and one of the products which approximates these assumptions are agricultural products like wheat and corn and grains and so forth. Lots and lots of sellers. They're produced all over the United States. In fact, the grain's produced all over the world. It's a worldwide market. We ship a lot of grain to Russia because we're extremely efficient in producing it. And then, as I said, thousands and thousands of buyers of this. All of the makers of livestock feed buy a lot of these grains, and then the bakeries and all the other places, etc. Second assumption is the products are identical. The products are identical once they have reached market. Corn and wheat and all these products are graded by quality. And what you will see is a grading of AAA is the highest quality. And AAA and then hard hull is the variety of the wheat. And then winter wheat is the seasonality. So the product is AAA hard hull winter wheat. Once it gets to market, it's indistinguishable from the other producers. Y'all with me? You have no idea who produced it because they're identical at that particular stage. The third assumption is that everybody has perfect information. There's zero cost of accurate information to both buyers and sellers. All the buyers know where it is. They know the quality. All the sellers know the most efficient means of producing it, the latest technology of production. All of them know that. And any change in technology, they will know instantaneously in the next market period. So you could make profits in one market period, but if you invented something, but by the next period, everybody knows what that is. So that's, again, an assumption of accurate information. And finally, there's absolutely free entry and exit for firms, meaning there's no fixed cost. Firms could go into production with no additional costs. And they could switch production. They could stop producing grain and produce corn. They could stop producing corn and produce soybeans. So again, you can see agricultural products approximate these assumptions. They get close to the assumptions. There's always some cost of switching. There's always some cost of switching. You all with me? And also, there's always some cost of getting accurate information. Although in agriculture you have all these magazines and radio shows that are for farmers, and Cal State Sacramento, I think it's Cal State Sacramento, specializes in farm products, and several universities in Kansas specialize in research in agricultural products. So the information is disseminated rapidly. And it's best, as we said, regarded as a benchmark, meaning that the economists made up these descriptors to be the most competitive case possible. You all with me? And it's a benchmark, meaning that the closer your industry gets to meeting those assumptions, the more the implications are accurate for your particular firm or your particular industry. So if you look at the marketplace for green, AAA hard winter wheat, we know what that looks like. The total demand is the sum of all the buyers. The supply is the sum of the marginal cost curves of all the existing firms. Price is determined in the marketplace by the interaction of these gigantic summations of demand and supply. The firm takes that price as a given. The firm is called a price taker, another word for perfect competition, because no matter where he or she produces, the market price will stay the same. Whether you produce 10,000, 15,000, 200,000, you're not going to change the market price. Consequently, the marginal revenue facing the curve is the same as market price. You know, a dollar a bushel is the price no matter what I produce. So theoretically, you could say the demand curve is horizontal, facing the individual firm. Because as I said, no matter where you produce, the price remains the same. If that's the case, then the price is the same as marginal revenue. I can sell every additional bushel and get the same price of a dollar. In determining the rate of production, we know the firm would want to produce as long as the additional revenue is more than the additional cost. And that's just math from profit. Profit's total revenue minus total cost. So if something adds more to revenue than it adds to cost, it contributes towards profitability. Everybody see it? If something added more to cost than it adds to revenue, then it would not contribute towards profitability. It would be a lower number. So the firm will adopt this rate of output where the marginal revenue is this height and the marginal cost of production is this height. Then you keep producing as long as that price is above the marginal cost of production. And the nth degree of that is when they're equal to each other. And so that is the profit maximizing rule. And by the way, you can put in your notes, that's the profit maximizing rule for any firm, because as I said, it's just the math of how total revenue changes as you increase the rate of production. Students will sometimes say to me, well, why would you produce the last unit? Because it cost you $1 to produce and you sell it for $1. And the answer is because it's a shortcut way of knowing that if I do produce there, I have produced all these units where the additional revenue is more than cost. I haven't produced any of these units where the marginal cost is above the additional revenue. So it's a rule of thumb, right? By doing that, I know I've done every unit that contributes towards profit, and I haven't done any that would reduce profitability. So in the short run, the firm's response curve is the marginal cost curve above average variable cost, If you're above average cost, then you're making positive economic profits. If you're above average variable cost, you're contributing something towards fixed cost. You're making enough dollars to pay all your workers, to pay your electricity bills, and you're making some additional money to go towards the long-term debt of the firm or other kinds of fixed cost. So in the short run, you'd stay in business, even if you're not covering all of your costs. As long as you're covering your operating costs and contributing towards fixed cost, you'd stay in business. In the long run, it is marginal cost above average cost. Long run supply curve of the firm, price above average cost or equal to average cost. Because in the long run, you don't have fixed cost. In the long run, everything's variable. So once I reach the decision of buying a new tractor, I wouldn't stay in business unless the price is such that I can cover the price of all the operating expenses plus the new tractor depreciated. Good. So long-run industry equilibrium. Long-run industry equilibrium. Equilibrium means that you've settled down. There's no tendency for change. And it's described by these two graphs together. On the left side, the market is in equilibrium, because the rate of production matches the rate of consumption, so the market's an equilibrium price, and the firm is producing where price equals average cost, where price equals average cost. And so they're not making economic profits, but they're covering all of their economic costs, which includes their opportunity costs for resources. So they're earning a normal rate of return, but not economic profits. Once you've reached that, then you're doing the best you possibly can, and there's no incentive for firms to enter, because if they did, price would decline, and there's no incentive for firms to leave because you're covering all of your expenses. And if you raised price, then in fact you would, and you can't raise price because of the assumptions of perfect competition. So that's perfect competition, right? That's that end. The other end is monopoly, and we said it means single sellers in the marketplace. And to be a monopoly, there must be barriers to entry, meaning there must be factors that are preventing other firms from coming into competition with you. There must be something there that's preventing them from being able to compete. Profit maximization, as we said, occurs where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, just the same as it was before. And we'll see that there is a potential efficiency loss due to the way the firm determines its rate of production. There are various sources of market power or monopoly power called, as I said, barriers to entry. And there's two columns of these. They're all barriers to entry. But number one, the people now in the industry, and they are called the incumbents, have certain advantages. Number one, they may own specific assets that are necessary to produce this product, and they may own access to all of them. If you produce aluminum, there's two major inputs, and that is electricity and bauxite are the two major inputs. And Alcoa, American Aluminum Company, right, number one, located their plant close to hydroelectric power, which is very cheap. And then secondly, they went out and bought up a lot of the bauxite mines so that they could withhold that specific asset from other firms. And they were successful in growing for a period of time by doing that. Eventually, more bauxite was found elsewhere, and so it didn't. But it was an incumbent advantage. The second is existing firms may have large economies of scale in production. And remember, economy of scale is, as I increase the rate of production, average cost is falling. Economy of scale, and then the minimum, and then diseconomy of scale on the other side. There's a major there's a major producer of notebooks, the three-ring notebooks. Avery, A-V-E-R-Y, Avery. And they've been in production for a long time. And we actually assisted them in a merger, and we had to prove to the FTC that the merger was pro-competitive. It was not anti-competitive. Well, the first thing the FTC wants to know is what percent of the market do they have? And so we characterize the market as the number of plants that each firm has. That was our unit of measure, was the number of plants. And there were other firms that had about the same number of plants that Avery had. So it demonstrated, well, there's not a lot of market power, except the plant in Ohio that Avery runs is like an entire city block. It's like this new Tesla firm out in Arizona, wherever it is. It was this gigantic production facility. So they have a substantial economies of scale, meaning they can ramp up production and get per unit cost to be lower because they have this excess capacity. And that's another term for economies of scale, is excess production capacity. Finally, incumbents may have substantial reputational effects, and that is that they've been around. People know what the quality of the product is, and so they have a good reputation for quality and for service and for a good product. Kleenex was one of the first manufacturers of facial tissue, and they advertised it as Kleenex, and it became, the term Kleenex became synonymous with facial tissues because it's easier to say, right? Another firm tried to name their product Kleenex, and they claimed to the FTC that now the word Kleenex is a generic term for facial tissue. And so everybody should be able to call it Kleenex because that's what it is. And the FTC said, no, this company invested a lot of money in getting that name to be well known and getting it to stand for their particular quality. And so you can't copy their name, right? It's protected by copyright. Incumbent reactions to potential entry. One is to prevent entry. You may enter into pre-commitment contracts, either with your suppliers or downstream with your sellers. And that forecloses the ability of other firms to come into that industry. General Electric made nuclear power plants, and I think has sold that subdivision by now, but palladium was an important input into the production of nuclear power. It's a uranium derivative, and so GE noticed that. I'm sorry. And the second use of palladium was for the mufflers on cars, the catalytic converter on a muffler, and it was about a third of the cost of the catalytic converter was the palladium that went into it. And they foresaw that that demand would continue to increase as more and more cars were sold. And also there were limited amounts of palladium. There were not many locations with palladium. So they entered into a 20-year contract at a fixed price. It's called a requirements contract. And it basically said, we will buy at least this much palladium from you at this fixed price. And you will guarantee, if we want to buy more, that you'll also sell us more at that fixed price. So that was a pre-commitment contract. It turns out that about 3 years later, there was a technological change in the catalytic converters that reduced the amount of palladium to like 1/3 of what it had been before. So that demand decreased substantially. And then we opened up mines in Africa and discovered these large holdings of palladium. And so the price came down substantially. But GE was locked in to that contract, and they lost $18 billion because they had locked in promising to pay this much for it when the market price fell substantially below it. What they did not do is hedge that contract, and that is, as I commit to buy it at that price, I also commit to sell it at that price to somebody else. And then I'm fully hedged, because if the price goes up, my wealth is unaffected, and if the price goes down, my wealth is unaffected. Clearly, licenses and patents are restrictions on potential entry. There's a nice article in this week's Economist on licensing and pointing out that in so many of these fields, well, pointing out that people with a high school education, only about 5% of them are operating with licenses, and people with a graduate degree, 45% of them are in licensed industries. And licensed industries mean you're restricting entry into that area. A lot of states, a lot of nurses are trained to be able to do many, many things, such as fit someone who has diabetes with the right kind of shoes, give inoculations or give shots to people and so forth. Several states have restrictive licenses that say these things can only be done by doctors. They can only be done by doctors because you have to have a doctor's license to be able to do this. And in the article, it was pointing out there's a woman in North Carolina who pays $1,000 a month to a doctor because everything she prescribes she has to send to him, and then he prescribes it. You with me? She's not allowed to prescribe, but she knows exactly how to do it. So, and then he has like 5 nurses that for whom he signs all these orders and so forth. So licensing can be a very big restriction. In some states, people who do nail polish are licensed. In some states, bartenders are licensed, and they have to pass an exam. And so you can see that a lot of these are restrictions on entry, which make it difficult to enter, and therefore you're protected from competition. Mortuaries are almost all licensed in every state, and it's a real restriction, and they make a lot of money. Also, you pay a lot because somebody's died. Good. If you're in the industry, you probably have learned a lot of secrets about how to produce. It's called learning curve effects. It means that as you practice doing something, you get better, so your average cost curve comes down or shifts downward. You've all had this experience. Yeah, I can do it. One summer, I went to work in a sheet metal shop, and I was the college guy, and all these guys are blue-collar workers in North Carolina in a little town called Hickory or someplace. And my dad had sold to them, or had sold. He was a sales representative for that company because they made jobs and so forth. So they hired me to come in and work on the floor. And the first job they gave me was to spray paint these grills that are metal, that are like this, and they go inside fine furniture cabinets. So visualize a cabinet, right, glass, and then behind the glass is this really pretty gold filigree thing. So he told me how to do it. You go to the paint shop and you hang it up, and then you shoot it from this direction and let it dry, and then you shoot it from that direction and let it dry, because it's all knurled around. And you shoot from this direction, let it dry, and shoot from this direction, let it dry, and then it's done. And you take it down and you put the next one up. So I did like 2 of them like that, and it was just boring because you just kept sitting there waiting for the paint to dry. So I strung a piece of rope across the paint shop, and I hung up like 10 of these on hangers. And then I got an extension on the air pistol for the sprayer. And so I got at one end, and I just sprayed and just walked down the line. And by the time I got to here, they had dried, so I went over and shot the other side of those, right? And by the time I got to here, they had dried, so then I shot it this way and shot it this way. And I finished the entire job in half a day. There were like 20 of these frames. And I went to the owner, I said, I finished. And he was pissed. He said, you can't be finished. It's a 3-day job. You can't be finished. And I said, well, I'm finished. And he said, well, you didn't do it right then. So he came, and sure enough, it was fine. I mean, it was done. Now, I'm not telling you that to tell you how smart Professor Tots is, although it does seem to indicate that. But you've all had this happen, right? You were given a job, and then you started to do it, and you thought, wait a minute, there's a much easier way to do this, right? Like I have to collate these things and staple them. Well, then I'll put the stapler at the end of the collation, right? So I can staple them there. And there's 2 or 3 other things that I did. They did not like me. I was called a rate buster and so forth. And then also, if you're the first to produce a product, you have a pioneering brand, and that gives you a technological step up from other people who have not produced it yet. And that's why firms can often extend monopoly power by patenting changes to the original product, because they're already doing it and they know how to do it, and so they're a step ahead in technological knowledge. So the demand facing the firm, if it's not the price taker, is downward sloping for monopoly, oligopoly, monopolistic competition. And we know the firm wants to maximize profit. We know that demand shows me the different quantities I'm able to sell at each individual price. And I know that total revenue is price times quantity. So if I were to sell 1 shirt at $10, total revenue would be 10. If I lower my price to 9, I would sell 2 shirts. Total revenue would be 18. If I lower it to $8, I'd sell 3/8 or 24. So as I move down in price, you can see initially total revenue is going up. Total revenue is increasing until I get to 5 and 6. So understanding how total revenue changes as I lower the price in this first range, I can calculate marginal revenue, which is the change in total revenue. And for the first unit, marginal revenue is the same as price. I charge 10, I sell 1 unit, it adds $10 to revenue. I lower my price to 9, I sell 2 units, but total revenue is now 18. It's 9 plus 9 is 18. So it hasn't gone up because I lowered the price on the first shirt from 10 to 9. Everybody see it, right? Good. Lower it again to $8. I sell 3 shirts, 3/8 are 24. 18 to 24 is $6. The additional revenue is how much does revenue go up as I sell that unit. Because I'm having to lower the price on previous units sold, I'm giving up revenue there to gain the new revenue over here. And so I can calculate that change. And as I get to $6 and 5 units, total revenue is 30. If I lower my price to 5, I sell 6 units, total revenue is again 30. So the marginal revenue of the 6th unit is 0. The total revenue doesn't go up, it's 30 and 30. In fact, if I try to sell the 7th shirt, I have to lower the price to $4, and 4 7s are 28. And so consequently, if I were to produce in that range, you'd actually have negative marginal revenue. Marginal revenue would go down. So consequently, again, here you can do it in table form. You calculate the quantity change, which in this example is 1 unit. Calculate the change in total revenue, that is marginal revenue. And as I said, in the upper half, it's positive. As I lower price, total revenue continues to go up. Once I get to the midpoint, though, if I continue to lower price, I sell more units, but total revenue is getting smaller. So marginal revenue would be negative. So the shortcut way of drawing the graph accurately is to find the midpoint of the straight line demand curve. And this is familiar because we did this with elasticity, right? Find the midpoint, and that's the point where marginal revenue is 0. The marginal revenue of the first unit is the same as price. So just get those 2 points, then draw the line through there, and that is the correct marginal revenue function for this particular demand curve. Also, you can see the tie-in between marginal revenue and elasticity. When demand's elastic, that's the upper half of the curve, lowering price increases total revenue, marginal revenue is positive. It's the increase. If you get to the inelastic region over here, and you were pricing in that region, raising price would increase total revenue. And so marginal revenue is negative for those units. If you were selling down here, you can see those units are detracting a lot from total revenue. So that's the marginal revenue function for a straight line demand curve. Knowing where we produce, marginal revenue equals marginal cost, I can lay in the 2 functions. Demand and marginal revenue come from the buyer's behavior. Marginal cost comes from the back room, my cost of production. And the best I can possibly do is produce that rate of output where the additional revenue coming in just matches the additional cost of production. And in this case, marginal revenue is not the same as price. Marginal revenue is less than price. But choosing that quantity of output is the quantity that maximizes profit. Because any unit less than that is adding more to revenue than it's adding to cost. And any unit after that is adding more to cost than it adds to revenue. So again, it's the standard rule. You maximize profit by producing where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. The price that will sell that quantity is the price on the demand curve. When you go up to the demand curve and across, if you charge that price, that's the quantity people will be willing and able to buy. And so that's the profit maximizing rate of output for the monopolist. Now we notice something different, though, and that is that marginal revenue, in this case, is greater than marginal cost. And for the price taker, it was the same. Remember, demand was marginal revenue. That was the price. You produce where marginal cost equaled it. So you produce where price equals marginal cost. Once you have a downward sloping demand curve, though, price now is greater than marginal cost of production. And so there's an issue about the efficiency of choosing that rate of production. Now, I've drawn 3 different demand curves showing differing degrees of close substitutes to see what this ratio looks like. And the example here would be Microsoft's operating system, Windows 11 or whatever we're at now. If you're building a computer and you go to Microsoft and say, I want to buy the operating system, it's about $230. In fact, when the new one comes out, I think the upgrade is like $70 or something like that. There's probably a student rate also. But if you think of the marginal cost to Microsoft of selling one more disk that has the program on it, the cost of the disk is maybe 2 cents. The cost of burning the data onto the disk is maybe 2 cents. You with me? The cost of the plastic box might be 2 cents. The cost of the tricolor picture that's inside might be 2 cents. So that's 2, 4, 6, 8. And it sells for $80 or $240. Good. Does Microsoft have market power? Yes, a lot of market power. So you'll see the fewer close substitutes there are, the higher the ratio of price to marginal cost. It's a monopoly, right? Everybody say, it's a monopoly, right? Good. Does that fact guarantee profits? Does that guarantee profits? And I can see all the econ majors saying no. Good. No, it doesn't, because profit is price relative to average cost. Y'all with me? Profit means you have to cover all your fixed costs, not only your marginal cost, but your fixed cost. So it's an important lesson to understand that because a firm is a monopoly, they have market power, but it does not guarantee profitability. It does not guarantee profits. When you look at Microsoft's development cost for the operating system, it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars, right? They pay all these engineers, they have all this equipment to practice it and try it out and all this kind of stuff. So market power means price above marginal cost, but it does not guarantee profitability. I know you've all had this experience as I had. You found a restaurant that was really good, and it was always packed, right? And the food was great, and the drinks were reasonable, and it went out of business. And it's like, well, how could it go out of business? They were doing such great business. Well, they weren't covering all their costs, right, for some reason. Good. When my girlfriend had her birthday a couple years ago, she wanted a purse. And so and there are all these international purses like Bogato or something that are like $3,000. Or what's the name of the super expensive ones? Huh? I don't know. Well, Louis Vuitton is one of the higher end ones, but then it goes beyond that. These things sell for like $30,000 a bag. What? Yeah. Is that it? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, just crazy. Well, she wasn't that crazy, but she wanted to look at a Coach bag. So we went into a Coach store, and they had a really nice little bag. It looked like a log, and the color was rouge. And it had gold clasps, and it had big stitching on it. And I turned the price tag over, and it was $800. And I thought, well, it's nice, but you know. So I said, honey, Macy's sells handbags, and that's a good store. Let's look at Macy's. So we went to Macy's, and sure enough, they had a bag that looked like a log, and the color was rose. And it looked very similar to not quite as good, right? But it was very, very similar. I turned the price tag over, and it was $400. So that's my example of this graph. It looked to me like Coach's marginal cost was probably around $400 because the Macy's bag looked like it was pretty similar, but they were selling it for $800. So clearly they have market power, but the ratio is not the same as it was. It's 2-to-1 in this case. And we were somewhere else, and I said, Target carries bags. Target carries bags. So we went to Target, and they had a little bag that was like a log. And the color was red, right? Rouge, rose, red. And it was made of pleather, which is pretend leather. And it sold for like $60 or something like that. So which one did she get? She got the Coach bag, right? I'm not stupid. Good. Here you take a look at something like tuna fish in the little 3-ounce can in the grocery store. And we're interested in the ratio of price to marginal cost. Well, if you think about the costs involved in getting that tuna fish there, number one, you have to hire some really stupid people to go out on a little tiny boat in the ocean and find the tuna. And the tuna are big fish, but they're underneath the water. So you don't know where they are. Y'all with me? You can try radar, but that shows a school of fish, but you kind of know where they hang out after experience. So you go out, you take this big line with big hooks, and you put dead fish on each hook, which is called chum, which is really disgusting. And then you throw the line over, and then you drive the boat in not a circle, in an ellipse, and dragging it past the shoal where you think these stupid fish may be. And the way you know how much you've hooked is the pitch of the engine. As these fish get on the line, you're dragging them, so the engine pitch goes down because the engine's working harder to drag all these things. So at some point, you want to bring it in, and these fish are like 800 pounds and stuff. So you got to get it up to the boat, and then you got to pull it into the boat, and you have to hope that it is a tuna and not a stingray or a shark, right, which also may be on your hook. Then you have to get it iced down immediately because the fish deteriorates almost instantaneously once it's out of the water. So you have to ice it down, get it in, get it on the dock, ice it again, get it into a perfectly clean cannery. And there you have to separate out the meat from the eyeballs and the fins and all that stuff. And then you have to cook it at very high degrees to prevent botulism or salmonella. And then you have to can it and ship it all the way out to the West Coast. So it turns out that a can that sells for about 89 cents has a marginal cost of production of about 86 cents. The markup is very small, very small. And also, demand's extremely elastic because right next to bumblebee tuna is chicken of the sea, is, what are the other ones? What? Yeah, store brand, Starkist, right. And then bumblebee. Like, I can understand Starkist, right, because it's starfish and stuff. And I can understand chicken of the sea. That makes sense, like chicken of the sea. Where's bumblebee tuna come in, right? Good. So here, the ratio is very small. The price above marginal cost is very small. Finally, for the farmer, price is the same as marginal cost. So the firm has no market power whatsoever. So measuring the market power, we look at the ratio of the price to marginal cost of production. You're looking at that, how big is that ratio that we just looked at? And the Lerner index is a standard way of estimating that relationship. The Lerner index is calculated by taking price minus marginal cost and divided by price. So looking back at our examples, here, price minus marginal cost is that big area. Divide that by price, and you get something like 80%, like 0.80. Y'all with me? You know, price minus marginal cost is the major portion of price. Here, it looks like it's about 50%. Price minus marginal cost is that area. Divide that by the whole area. Looks like it's about 0.5. And for the tuna fish, price minus marginal cost looks like it's about 20% of the price. So the Lerner index is a ratio between 0 and 1. And if you have no market power, then there isn't anything between price and marginal cost, so the index would be 0. If you have complete market power, would mean marginal cost is 0, then the number you'd get would be 1. So a larger Lerner index indicates greater market power for the firm. As I pointed out to you, the fact that you are the only producer or you face a downward sloping demand curve does not guarantee profitability. To see if I'm profitable, I'd have to add into the diagram the per unit cost of production. And average cost could be anywhere. We know it's going to intersect marginal cost at the minimum, but average cost could be here, it could be here, it could be here, it could be anywhere along this cost curve. But I've just chosen one to demonstrate. If average cost is less than price at the rate at which you're producing, then the firm has the potential of earning positive economic profits. Positive economic profits. I'll tell a quick version of a story of a man of Raytheon who made the vacuum tubes for microwave transmitters. And microwaves have been used to transmit data for years. And if you go downtown, you'll see a gigantic, what looks like a rectangle, looks like a speaker. And there's another one 5 miles away. And those are microwave transmitters and receivers. And they're sending data back and forth. And in the 1958, the transmitter itself was about the size of this room. And it cost, like by today's standard, it would cost like $15 million. I mean, in today's prices and stuff. The chief engineer was down in the lab looking at a new microwave generating tube, and they turned it on. The tech was explaining to him, this is what it does, and so forth. And he said, fine. And he went back up to his office, and he took a Hershey bar out of his jacket pocket, and it was partially melted. And he's an engineer, and he couldn't figure out why. And I wore this jacket all the time, and it never melted before. Where was I? I was down on the line. So he went out and bought a little tiny bag of popping corn. This is a true story. Went back down to the lab, set it right next to the vacuum tube, and he said to the technician, turn it on. Now, if you were the technician, think about this. You're in the lab, you make these things for, microwave generators, and the guy brings in a little bag of popcorn and puts it next to, Well, sure enough, after some number of minutes, some of the corn popped. And he realized somehow that this was generating some kind of energy which was causing the food to cook. Now, we now know what it is. Microwaves cause the water molecules within the food to vibrate, and that generates heat inside of the food, and that's how it cooks in that way. So long story short, and by the way, he went to the board at the next board meeting and said, I think we could cook food with microwaves. And you all with me? I mean, it cost $15 million to build the transmitter. What are you talking? It takes all this stuff. Well, over time, we went from vacuum tubes to transistors, from transistors to chips, and eventually the cost of building a transmitter went down and down, and eventually they were successful in building a containment unit and being successful in this. Amana made positive economic profits for a period of time, but like anything, other firms like GE and Sharp Electric would go out and reverse engineer what your machine does and then figure out what parts of it are patented, and then can I build a transmitter without violating your patent, and then we have competition. And today, as you guys know, go to Best Buy, there's a whole wall of microwave ovens, right? From a sandwich size up to one that cooks turkeys and so forth. So my point is, unless you have barriers to entry, these economic profits will be bid away by other firms entering into the industry. As they enter, demand for your product declines and becomes more elastic, and in the long run, if entry is possible, you end up with zero economic profits. Finally, the argument about an efficiency loss is that it looks like the competitive outcome would be here, because this looks like it's the supply curve and this is the demand curve. And you're not producing there, you're producing here. And these units are more valuable to buyers than they are the cost of production. So it looks like this is an efficiency loss due to the restricted output and raising of price of the firm. So three other ways of thinking about barriers to entry. One is existing firms may have an absolute cost advantage. Either you have the specific resources or you know how to do it better than other people. Two, it could be a natural monopoly, which is where the market will only support one firm, such as electricity distribution in a community, natural gas distribution, oil distribution. Good. And finally, differentiated products gives you potentially market power. And then, as we talked about, the regulatory barriers of licensing, patents, franchise, and so forth restrict entry and potentially give market power.